I caught my daughter manipulating others, but I had patience and foresight. I've lived 73 years on this earth, and in that time, I've learned that the cruelest wounds aren't delivered with shouting or fists. They come wrapped in sweet smiles and gentle whispers. The day I first noticed the shadow growing in my daughter's heart, I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracturing, like ice splitting beneath still water. Emma was my only child, my miracle baby, the girl I'd raised to know kindness above all else. But somewhere between her childhood dreams and adult ambitions, something had twisted. And I, her mother, had been too blinded by love to see it happening until the damage had already begun spreading like poison through our family's veins. Hello, my dear friends. I'm Alice, and this is my corner of the world where I share the stories life has carved into my heart. If you're new here, welcome to the family. And if you've been walking this journey with me, bless you. Your presence means more than you know. These stories aren't always easy to tell, but they're real, and they're filled with the lessons I've learned through tears, patience, and time. Before we continue, would you do this old woman a kindness? Hit that subscribe button and help me reach 1,000 subscribers before next week. Every subscription tells me my voice still matters, that these stories still need to be heard. Now, let me tell you about the hardest lesson I ever had to teach, and the daughter I almost lost in the process. My kitchen has always been the heart of my home. It's small, with yellow wallpaper that's faded over the decades and a wooden table my late husband, Robert, built with his own hands 40 years ago. The scratches and stains tell stories: Emma's homework sessions, holiday meals, tearful conversations over coffee. It was at this table, on a Tuesday morning in late September, that I first saw my daughter for who she'd become. She'd stopped by unexpectedly, breezing through my door with that radiant smile that once melted my heart. "Morning, Mom," she sang, kissing my cheek with practiced affection. Emma was 38 then, beautiful in that polished, professional way that comes from expensive salons and careful maintenance. Her perfume, something floral and sharp, cut through the smell of my chamomile tea. "Coffee?" I offered, already reaching for a mug. "Just water, thanks." "Can't stay long." She settled into Robert's old chair, pulling out her phone with manicured nails that clicked against the screen. "I actually came to talk about Aunt Margaret." "My sister." I felt my spine straighten instinctively. "What about her?" I asked carefully, filling a glass from the tap. Emma's expression shifted into something I'd later recognize as her manipulation mask, concern painted over calculation. "Mom, I'm worried about you. Margaret's been saying things about how you're managing your money. She thinks you're becoming forgetful, maybe even declining." The glass nearly slipped from my hand. Margaret and I had been close since childhood, weathering our parents' deaths, failed marriages, health scares. We spoke 3 times a week. "Margaret said that?" "Not directly to me," Emma admitted, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "But Sarah overheard her at Bridge Club. Mom, people are starting to talk. They think maybe you need help, supervision even." I told them they were wrong, of course, but... She let the sentence dangle like a baited hook. Something cold settled in my chest. Sarah was my cousin, Margaret's best friend for 60 years. If this conversation had happened, Margaret would have told me. We told each other everything. "When did Sarah hear this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the churning in my gut. Emma's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before she shrugged. "Last week? Mom, the point isn't when. The point is you might want to talk to Margaret. Clear the air before this gossip spreads. You know how these things get out of hand." I set the water glass in front of her and sat down slowly, studying my daughter's face. There was something there I'd never noticed before, or perhaps had chosen not to see. A satisfaction. A subtle pleasure in delivering this painful news. "I'll call Margaret," I said quietly. "But that's good." Emma checked her phone again, stood up. "I have to run. Meeting at 10. Love you, Mom." She was gone before I could respond, leaving only that sharp perfume and a gnawing suspicion I couldn't quite name. I did call Margaret. That afternoon, sitting in my worn armchair with the phone pressed to my ear, I asked her directly about the bridge club conversation. What conversation? Margaret's confusion was genuine. I'd known her voice long enough to recognize truth. Alice, I've never discussed your finances with anyone. Why would I? And I certainly don't think you're declining. You're sharper than women half your age. Emma said Sarah overheard you. Sarah wasn't even at bridge club last week. She's been in Florida visiting her grandson. Margaret's voice shifted from confused to concerned. Alice, what's going on? I didn't answer right away. Pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture I desperately didn't want to see. Let me call you back, I whispered. Over the next 2 weeks, I began paying attention in ways I hadn't before. I started showing up to family gatherings early, lingering in doorways, listening to conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. I noticed how Emma would pull people aside, her voice low and earnest. I watched faces change as she spoke, confusion giving way to concern, warmth cooling into distance. At my nephew's birthday party, I saw her corner his wife, Jessica, in the kitchen. I stood just outside, hidden by the open door. I probably shouldn't say anything, Emma was saying, but I'm worried about James. He's been so distant lately, so secretive with his phone. I just thought, well, as his wife, you should know he's been having lunch with that new woman from his office. Repeatedly. Jessica's face went pale. Are you sure? I saw them last Thursday. They look close. I'm sure it's innocent, but... That practiced pause again. Just keep your eyes open, okay? I'd hate to see you get hurt. James was my brother's son, devoted to Jessica and their 3 kids. He'd been mentoring the new hire, a recent graduate, at his company. Emma knew this. She'd been at the dinner where James had mentioned it, praising the young woman's potential. But here she was, planting seeds of suspicion that could destroy a marriage. I felt sick. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the darkness of my bedroom, Robert's side of the bed still somehow feeling empty after 7 years, and forced myself to look back. How many relationships had fractured in the past year? How many friends had stopped calling, family members grown distant? There was the argument between my 2 nephews over a supposed slight at Christmas. Emma had been the one to report it. The falling out between Margaret and our cousin Ruth over a misunderstood comment. Emma had been present for that too, trying to help by explaining what Ruth really meant. My daughter, my beautiful girl, had become a puppet master, pulling strings and watching relationships collapse like it was some kind of game. But I thought of her childhood, the way she'd manipulated her teachers for better grades, turned friends against each other to maintain her social position. I dismissed it as normal childhood drama, phases she'd outgrow. But she hadn't grown out of it. She'd grown into it, refined it, weaponized it. And I'd been too blinded by mother's love to see the monster I'd allowed her to become. The question now was what to do about it. Confronting her directly would only make her defensive, push her further into her patterns. Public exposure would destroy her, and despite everything, she was still my daughter. My heart still ached for the girl she'd been, the woman she could have become. This required something else. Something patient. Something that would teach rather than punish. I am 73 years old, and life has taught me that the best lessons aren't delivered, they're discovered. So I began to plan. That morning, as autumn light filtered through my kitchen window, I pulled out an old notebook, the kind with a marbled cover, and wrote a single word at the top of the first page, evidence. I didn't know then how deep Emma's web had spread, or how many people she'd hurt. I didn't know that my careful documentation would eventually expose betrayals that reached far beyond our family, into her workplace, her friendships, every corner of her life. But what I did know, sitting there with my coffee growing cold and my heart breaking into smaller and smaller pieces, was that my daughter was destroying everything good around her. And I was the only one who could stop her. The question was, Would she forgive me when she finally understood what I'd done? 3 months had passed since I'd started my notebook, and its pages had grown heavy with truth. Each entry was dated, detailed, undeniable. I'd become a detective in my own family, tracking my daughter's manipulations like a scientist documenting a disease. But the more I discovered, the deeper my heartbreak grew. Emma wasn't just causing small misunderstandings anymore. She was systematically destroying lives, and she was doing it with a smile that could charm angels. The hardest part wasn't gathering the evidence. It was watching the damage unfold while staying silent, knowing that every day I waited, someone else got hurt. But I'd learned long ago that patience, though painful, often reveals truths that haste would miss. And I needed to see the full picture before I could help Emma see herself. It was a cold December morning when I discovered just how far Emma's manipulations had reached. I'd been invited to her office Christmas party. She worked as a senior manager at a marketing firm downtown, a position she'd held for 3 years. She'd always spoken proudly of her team, her accomplishments, her rapid rise through the company. I'd believed every word. The party was held in an elegant hotel ballroom, all crystal chandeliers and soft jazz. Emma glided through the crowd like royalty, her red dress catching the light, her laughter musical. I stood near the refreshment table, nursing a cup of punch, when a young woman approached me. "Mrs. Chen?" she asked tentatively. "I'm Rachel. I worked with Emma." The past tense caught my attention. Worked. Rachel's eyes were rimmed with red, like she'd been crying recently. "I was let go last week. Performance issues," they said. "But..." She glanced across the room where Emma was holding court with senior executives. "Can I tell you something? You're her mother. Maybe you can help her see what she's doing." My stomach tightened. "Please." Rachel's story spilled out in a whisper. She'd been Emma's assistant, hardworking and talented. 6 months ago, she'd received praise from the company's CEO for a campaign idea. The next day, Emma had started a quiet campaign of her own, subtle comments about Rachel's reliability, carefully timed concerns about her judgment, strategic undermining of her work. Within weeks, Rachel had gone from rising star to liability. By the time Rachel realized what was happening, her reputation was destroyed. The worst part, Rachel's voice cracked. I looked up to her. I thought she was mentoring me. Every time she criticized my work, I believed her. I thought I was failing. After Rachel left, I stood there in that glittering ballroom, watching my daughter charm and smile, and felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just about family anymore. Emma was destroying people's careers, their livelihoods, their sense of self-worth. I went home that night and added Rachel's story to my notebook. Then I did something I'd been avoiding. I created a timeline, mapping every manipulation I'd documented. The pattern was stunning in its cruelty. Emma targeted anyone who might outshine her, anyone who received praise or attention she felt should be hers. She eliminated competition and potential threats with surgical precision. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated the power of truth and the patience of an old woman with nothing but time. January brought new revelations. I'd started reaching out quietly to the people Emma had hurt, not to expose her yet, but to understand. I called it checking in, innocent conversations over coffee or phone calls. What I discovered was a network of pain spanning years. There was Michael, Emma's ex-boyfriend from college, who'd lost his entire friend group after their breakup because Emma had spread rumors about his aggressive behavior. The truth? He'd broken up with her, and she couldn't tolerate rejection. There was Linda, a former coworker, who'd been passed over for promotion after Emma expressed concerns about her stability. Linda had been going through a divorce. Emma had weaponized her vulnerability. There was even Daniel, my own grandson from Robert's first marriage, who'd stopped visiting because Emma had told him I'd said cruel things about his mother. Things I'd never said, would never say. Each story added another page to my notebook, another crack in my heart. But I kept going. I had to see the complete picture. I had to understand how deep this went before I could pull it out by the roots. In February, I discovered Emma's methods had evolved. She'd started using technology, carefully worded emails that seemed helpful but planted doubt, text messages that could be interpreted multiple ways, social media posts that appeared supportive while subtly undermining. She'd become a master of plausible deniability. I learned this from Marcus, her colleague who'd contacted me after hearing I'd spoken with Rachel. Marcus was in his 50s, a kind man with 2 daughters. Emma had befriended him, earning his trust over months. Then, when he confided about his struggles with his teenage daughter's rebellion, Emma had used that information. She'd sent a carefully crafted email to HR expressing concern about his emotional state affecting his work performance, attaching screenshots of his venting messages to her as evidence. I trusted her, Marcus told me, his voice hollow. I thought she cared. Instead, she used my pain as ammunition. He'd been placed on performance review. His reputation was damaged. His confidence was shattered. And Emma? She'd been promoted to his position within a month. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my notebook open, tears streaming down my face. This wasn't the child I'd raised. This wasn't the little girl who'd cried over injured birds and made cards for lonely neighbors. Somewhere, somehow, my Emma had disappeared, replaced by this calculating stranger who found power in other people's pain. But she was still my daughter. And I still believed, had to believe, that the girl I'd loved was still in there somewhere, buried under years of twisted ambition and unchecked cruelty. The moment everything crystallized came on a Sunday in early March. I'd invited Emma for lunch, something we did monthly. She arrived late, distracted by her phone, barely tasting the soup I'd spent the morning making. "Mom, I need a favor," she said suddenly, not looking up from her screen. "Of course, sweetheart. It's about Margaret." My spine stiffened at my sister's name. "I think she's been talking to people at my company. One of my colleagues mentioned meeting a Margaret Chen at some charity event, and she was asking questions about me. It feels invasive, inappropriate." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Margaret didn't even know the name of Emma's company, had never attended the charity events Emma frequented. "What kind of questions?" I asked carefully. "About my management style, my relationships with my team." "Mom, it's embarrassing. It makes me look bad, like I can't handle my own professional life without family interference." Emma finally looked up, her eyes wide and wounded. "Could you talk to her? Ask her to stop." And there it was, another attempt to isolate me from the people who loved me, to create distance between me and anyone who might see through her facade. But this time I saw it clearly. The manipulation, the calculation, the complete absence of genuine emotion behind those practiced expressions. "I'll handle it," I said quietly. Emma smiled, relieved, and went back to her phone. She didn't notice my hands shaking. She didn't see the decision forming behind my eyes. That afternoon, after Emma left, I made several phone calls. To Rachel, to Marcus, to Michael, Linda, and 6 other people whose stories filled my notebook. I invited them all to Emma's upcoming birthday party, a celebration I was planning for next month. Emma thought it would be a triumph, a gathering of admirers and conquered rivals. She had no idea I was preparing to hold up a mirror that would show her exactly what she'd become. That night, I sat in Robert's old chair, running my fingers over the worn armrests where his hands had rested for 40 years of marriage. I wished he was here. He'd always known what to say, how to guide Emma when she'd started showing troubling signs even as a child. "Am I doing the right thing?" I whispered to the empty room, to his memory, to the universe. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time. In 4 weeks, Emma would walk into her birthday party expecting celebration. Instead, she'd face the truth of what she'd done, presented not with anger but with evidence, with the faces of everyone she'd hurt, with the undeniable reality of her actions. I didn't know if it would save her or destroy her. I didn't know if our relationship would survive what was coming. But I knew, with the certainty of 73 years of living, that doing nothing would destroy her completely. She'd continue this pattern until there was no one left to hurt, until she'd isolated herself so thoroughly that she'd wake up one day and realize she was utterly, completely alone. Better the painful truth now than that slow, inevitable death of the soul. I closed my notebook and placed it in my kitchen drawer, beneath the tablecloths and placemats. 4 more weeks of watching. 4 more weeks of evidence gathering. 4 more weeks of preparing to break my daughter's heart in order to save it. The hardest love, I was learning, isn't the love that protects from pain. It's the love that allows pain when pain is the only path to healing. The morning of Emma's birthday party, I woke before dawn with my heart hammering against my ribs like a frightened bird. The house was silent except for the old pipes groaning and the refrigerator humming its eternal song. I lay there in the gray light, Robert's pillow still indented beside me after all these years, and wondered if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life, or save my daughter's soul. The party was set for 6 o'clock that evening at Emma's apartment, one of those modern places with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked expensive but uncomfortable. She'd insisted on hosting it herself, controlling every detail like she controlled everything else in her life. She had no idea I'd been coordinating with her guests behind the scenes, that the celebration she'd planned was about to become something entirely different. I'd barely slept in weeks. My notebook sat on my nightstand, its pages filled with dates, names, and documented lies. I'd rehearsed what I would say 100 times, but now that the moment had arrived, every word felt inadequate. How do you show someone they've become a monster without destroying them completely? How do you love someone enough to break them so they can heal? I didn't have all the answers, but I had patience, evidence, and a mother's desperate hope that somewhere beneath the manipulation and cruelty, my real daughter still existed. By 5:30, I was standing outside Emma's building, clutching a bakery box containing the birthday cake I'd made, her favorite, chocolate with raspberry filling, the same recipe I'd used for every birthday since she was 3. My hands trembled slightly as I pressed the buzzer. "Mom, you're early." Emma's voice crackled through the intercom, bright and unsuspecting. "Come on up." Her apartment was already transformed. Dim lighting, jazz playing softly, expensive appetizers arranged on slate boards. Emma looked stunning in a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She hugged me, and for just a moment, I let myself remember her as a child, small and innocent and mine. "This is beautiful, sweetheart," I said, setting down the cake. "Only the best," she replied, checking her reflection in the hall mirror. "I invited about 30 people. Should be a good turnout." I knew exactly who she'd invited, the colleagues she'd manipulated into admiration, the family members she hadn't yet alienated, the friends who didn't know what she'd done to their predecessors. But they wouldn't all be coming. Some had declined politely. Others I'd quietly asked to stay away, not wanting an audience too large for what needed to happen. The ones who mattered, the ones she'd hurt, they were coming. And they knew why. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. Rachel arrived first, her face pale but determined. Then Marcus, dressed in a suit despite the casual invitation, his jaw set. Michael came next, then Linda, then others whose stories filled my notebook. Emma greeted each one with surprise and delight, never noticing how they avoided her hugs, how their smiles didn't reach their eyes. "Mom, did you invite all these people?" Emma whispered to me, confused but pleased. "I didn't even know you had their contact information." "I thought it would be nice," I said softly, "to bring everyone together." By 6:30, 15 people sat in Emma's living room, not the 30 she'd expected, but exactly the 15 I'd contacted. Emma fluttered between them, playing hostess, unaware she was a butterfly in a web of her own making. I caught Rachel's eye across the room. She nodded slightly. It was time. "Everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the conversation. "If I could have your attention, please." The room fell silent. Emma turned to me, smiling expectantly, thinking this was the moment for birthday toasts and celebration. I pulled my notebook from my purse. The marbled cover caught the light. "Emma, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something important. In front of everyone here, because they're all part of this story." My voice was steady despite the earthquake in my chest. Her smile faltered. "Mom, what?" "3 months ago," I continued, "you came to my kitchen and told me that Aunt Margaret was spreading rumors about my mental decline. Do you remember?" Emma's face went carefully blank. "I was just concerned." "It was a lie." The words dropped like stones into still water. "Margaret never said those things. Sarah wasn't even in town that week. You fabricated the entire story to drive a wedge between my sister and me." "Mom, I think you misunderstood." "Let me finish." I opened the notebook. "On October 15th, you told Jessica that her husband James was having suspicious lunches with a coworker. You implied infidelity. That was a lie. James was mentoring that young woman, and you knew it. You were trying to destroy their marriage." Jessica, sitting near the window, made a small sound. She hadn't known Emma was the source of those poisonous whispers. Emma's face flushed. "I was trying to protect her." "On November 3rd, I continued, my voice growing stronger, you sent an email to HR about Marcus, expressing concern about his emotional stability. You attached private messages he'd shared with you in confidence about his daughter's struggles. He was placed on performance review. You were promoted to his position 4 weeks later." Marcus stood up slowly. "You told me you'd keep that conversation private. You said you understood that your own family had issues." "I do understand." Emma's voice rose, defensive now. "I was worried about the company." "About yourself," Rachel interrupted, standing as well. "You systematically destroyed my reputation for 6 months because the CEO complimented my campaign idea. You made me think I was incompetent, that I was failing. I lost my job, Emma. My career. My confidence." The room was electric now, truth crackling through the air like lightning. "I have 14 stories like this in my notebook," I said quietly. 14 people whose lives you've damaged or destroyed. Relationships you've sabotaged. Careers you've ruined. Trust you've weaponized. And these are just the ones I found." Emma looked around the room, seeing for perhaps the first time the faces of her victims all gathered in one place. Her expressions cycled through denial, anger, fear, and finally something that might have been recognition. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's competitive out there. You have to be strategic, you have to protect yourself." "By destroying others?" Linda spoke up from the couch. "By turning people's vulnerabilities against them?" "Emma, that's not strategy. That's cruelty." Emma's composure cracked then, truly and completely. She sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. I never meant." But the protests died on her lips because we all knew they were lies. She had meant it. Every time. I knelt beside her chair, my old knees protesting, and took her hands in mine. They were ice cold. "Emma, look at me." She raised her eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter, frightened, ashamed, lost. "You've been operating on the belief that power comes from controlling others, from eliminating competition, from staying on top no matter who you have to step on. But sweetheart, look around. Look at what that belief has cost you." Tears were streaming down her face now, black mascara tracking down her cheeks. "Everyone in this room is here because I asked them to come. Not to punish you, but to show you the truth of what you've become. These aren't enemies, Emma. These were colleagues, friends, people who trusted you. And you hurt every single one of them." "I don't know how to stop," she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "I don't know how to be any other way." My heart broke and mended simultaneously. Because that admission, that raw, honest confession, was the first real thing she'd said in years. "Then we learn together," I said. "Starting now. Starting with apologies and accountability. starting with the hard work of becoming someone you can be proud of. I stood slowly, addressing the room. I know Emma has hurt you all deeply. Some of you may never forgive her, and that's your right. But I asked you here tonight because I believe people can change. Not easily, not quickly, but truly. My daughter has a choice to make now: continue destroying lives, or begin the painful work of rebuilding her own. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Marcus spoke, his voice gruff. If you're serious about changing Emma, you need to start with HR on Monday. Tell them the truth about what you did to me, to Rachel, to others at the company. Rachel nodded. And you need therapy. Real therapy, not just to manage the fallout, but to understand why you do this. One by one, the others spoke. Not with forgiveness, that would take time, if it came at all, but with clear expectations. With boundaries. With the kind of honest confrontation Emma had never faced before. When everyone had left, Emma and I sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, surrounded by untouched appetizers and the ruins of her carefully constructed life. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said, her voice raw. "For everything. For what I did to you, to Margaret, to everyone. I know, sweetheart. And sorry is a start. But it's just the beginning." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Will you help me? I don't know how to fix this." "Yes," I said simply. "That's what mothers do." That night, driving home through empty streets, I thought about patience and love and the terrible courage it takes to hurt someone in order to heal them. Emma's journey would be long and painful. Some relationships would never be repaired. Some consequences couldn't be undone. But 3 years have passed since that birthday party, and my daughter is not the same person. She left her job, started therapy, and began the slow process of making amends. She volunteers now at a youth center, teaching teenagers about healthy communication and the dangers of manipulation. She's rebuilding relationships one honest conversation at a time. Is she perfect? Does she still struggle with old patterns? But she's trying, genuinely trying, and that's all any of us can do. I learned that love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's a mirror held up with steady hands, reflecting truths we'd rather not see. Sometimes it's gathering evidence of someone's worst moments and presenting it not as condemnation, but as an invitation to become better. Real power, I told Emma that night, doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from mastering yourself, from choosing integrity when manipulation would be easier, from building others up instead of tearing them down. She's learning that now. And watching her grow into someone worthy of trust again has been the greatest gift of my old age. My dear friends, thank you for walking this painful journey with me. If this story touched your heart, if you've learned something about patience, redemption, or the complicated nature of love, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to Grandma Alice Stories. Share these tales with others who need to hear them. Every subscription, every share, tells me these old memories still have value, that wisdom earned through tears still matters in this fast-moving world. Until next time, remember, the hardest lessons to teach are often the most important. And love, real love, isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth it. With love and blessings, Grandma Alice.